Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to some more lore, although I really don't know how I'm going to be going about this one, because the one I'm going to be tackling today, which you probably guessed from the description, no, really all that subtle, is the Beastmen of Chaos, and, well, all of the other races I've covered, you know, they've got tons of backstory, they've got tons of lore, they've got tons of social things, they've got a religion, they've got an economy, they've got honor, they've got rules of engagement, all of these things. The Beastmen, well, how do you make a lore video about a bunch of goats, cows, and occasionally dragons hiding out in the forest while being really jealous of humans? The Beastmen are not exactly a treasure trove of information, shall we just say. Their religion is, well, they worship chaos. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and I will touch upon it, but it's nothing particularly complicated. If you watched my video on chaos, you've got a pretty good understanding of what chaos is and how chaos works, so that, essentially. They have no economy, like, literally none. Even the orcs had a kind of commodity, at the very least, you know, commodity-based, but the Beastmen, well, they don't even really trade, they just beat each other up, so, you know, orcish, certainly, but yeah, ridiculously enough, it lacks a little bit of the complexity of orcish trade. Never thought I'd be using that sentence. And they don't have much of a social group either. Like, they're divided into ranks, they're divided into various castes. They're an extremely caste-based system where, I hate to get political and racist this early in the bloody episode, but you could compare it to the caste system of India, which, although it has been getting a lot more liberal lately, is still pretty goddamn batshit, at least considered by most of us in the West to be pretty damn batshit. And, well, it's not like they have much of a system of government. I mean, their government is literally the good old-fashioned law of nature, the right of the strong. The biggest, baddest war boss who can beat the shit out of the most biggest, baddest other war bosses, now being the second biggest, baddest war bosses, is the boss. It's kind of an orcish thing, except for the simple fact that when an orc becomes a war boss, he starts, well, egging on everyone around him. Every single other orc starts getting bigger and stronger as he's continuously hyping himself up for the fight against the war boss. For the Beastmen, this is not quite the same. The Beastmen are much more sneaky about it. For example, a Beastman will not hesitate to challenge the leader to a honor duel while the leader is wounded. In fact, there is a wonderful part in the Beastmen army book detailing just such an occurrence, where a warlord is challenged right after a battle in which he was heavily wounded and is thereby defeated. Not particularly honorable, but certainly effective. So, how do we begin? Well, let's start out with the simplest place, shall we? The boring refuge of those of little mind power, the good old-fashioned geography lesson. So, this is the Warhammer world. It is infested with Beastmen. There are a lot of Beastmen. They're not as numerous as the Skaven, they're not quite as numerous as the Orcs, and that's mostly because, well, the Orcs will constantly fight amongst each other, and the Skaven will constantly fight amongst each other. The Beastmen, ironically enough, are united in a common purpose. Well, united as that they, well, still kill each other in massive numbers, and virtually continuously, but they have the same goal, which should suggest that they're a unified force, but really nothing could be further from the truth. Essentially, if a powerful enough individual does pop up, he will essentially be accepted as a herald of the gods, I suppose, and so the other Beastmen will listen to him, in between trying to kill him. The thing is, though, the Beastmen are a very hunter-gathery, almost, kind of race. They're very scattered, and as such they're also quite vulnerable to the attentions of the more civilized races, and as such their numbers have been plummeting quite considerably. Although that is in comparison to the early days when chaos first began pouring into the land, when the Beastmen were literally everywhere, and they were probably the most populous of all of the races, so I do say that they've fallen from grace, so to say, with the numbers, but they are still probably the third most populous race on the face of the world, so, you know, it's not like they're that lacking in numbers. But you're probably already noticing that there are a few places there are not Beastmen, which this is a bit of an interesting part. So, there are tons of Beastmen in the north and the south, the poles, because this is where the power of chaos is strongest, and Beastmen, being creatures of chaos, will naturally flock to areas that has a high concentrations of chaos power. There are also substantial infestations in the kingdoms of Ind, Cathay, and Nippon, but though it might appear from this map that they have essentially just overrun these places, you should just take a quick look at the Empire and you will see that there are a ton of Beastmen in the Empire. But these are not a organized nation-level resistance. These are hundreds, if not thousands, of small warbands scattered across the forest and hidden places of the world. So, while the map looks mighty daunting, it's not as bad as it looks, but on the other hand, it also means that there's a hell of a lot of Beastmen in any particular area, which is dangerous, let's just say. And the Beastmen have been retconned a few times, let's just say, so I think you can take this map as a relatively simple basis for your assumptions of where the Beastmen are. Although I would like to point out that while Ulthuan has always been free of the followers of chaos, so they wouldn't be there are mentions of Beastmen in Lustria, although this has since been retconned to the point where you can't really be entirely sure whether or not there really are Beastmen in Lustria, but just bear that in mind. You might also wonder, why aren't there Beastmen in the Darklands? Well, it's because the competition is a wee bit stiff. The Beastmen are ambushers, they are opportunistic hunters, and therefore the Darklands, which is seething with orcs and chaos dwarves, is not a very good hunting place to say the absolute least. Much better to stay within the deep dark forests of Cathay, Nippon, Ind, and the Empire. But I mentioned that the Beastmen are opportunistic hunters, so again, let's touch upon the, I hesitate to call it organization of the Beastmen, but nevertheless. The Beastmen are not really organized in nations or regions or provinces, they are organized into warbands. A warband could consist of no more than a handful of Beastmen, or it could contain thousands, if not tens of thousands. Of course, the leadership of such a large warband will require a particularly powerful war leader, and the problem with that is the simple fact that once you've got one really powerful war leader, odds are he's got a lot of not quite as powerful war leaders under him. So if anybody actually manages to kill the prime war leader, you can bet your shiny little ass that number 3 is immediately going to be challenging number 2 for the number 1 spot. And so it goes, often until the warband has completely splintered away into dozens of smaller factions, which then usually turn upon each other in a rather violent display of bloodletting. Beastmen warband also regularly engage in interspecies conflict. Two Beastmen warband that meet each other will more than likely fight each other. The only real exception is if the leader of one warband The only real exception would be if the leader of one warband immediately submits to the leader of the other warband, which is pretty goddamn bloody rare. Or if there's a duel fought, and it is a very one-sided duel, in which case the winner will come out of it with enough strength and, well, health, basically, so that no one else will want to try their luck. Or, potentially, the warband might be led by a shaman, a so-called Bray shaman. These are considered messengers of the gods, and often they will rally the warbands to a concerted effort against a particular objective. And seeing as they are considered holy men, this does not grant them total immunity to getting bopped over the head with an axe or anything, but at the very least it will ensure that most of the time, the other war leader won't immediately kill him, and might even listen to him. Although, never say never. However, this holy calling can not only be a uniting factor between Beastmen warbands. Beastmen will happily is stretching it, but Beastmen warbands will fight alongside whoever, really, as long as they are other followers of Chaos. Beastmen will fight alongside human champions, although they'll be pretty damn pissy about it. They'll fight alongside other followers of Chaos. They might even be convinced to fight alongside supposed followers of Chaos. There is a few instances in the fluff where they have fought alongside Dark Elves who have called themselves worshippers of Slanesh, although in this case it's more or less the Dark Elves manipulating the Beastmen, so it's definitely an exception rather than a rule. But a particularly powerful human champion could quite easily quite easily might be an overstatement, but yeah, a powerful human champion could lead a considerable contingent of Beastmen, and they might even ally themselves to mutants and other human outcasts, although the Beastmen do not take kindly to humans in the best of circumstances, and so an alliance with just mutants is, unusual, simply because, well, the Beastmen really do not like humans. We are pretty much their primary enemy, their nemesis. We are the anti-everything they really stand for. And to understand just why that is, I'll take a slight divergence here. You see, during the first storm of chaos, when the polar warp gate originally collapsed, this is when the Beastmen race was created. They are an unholy mutation of human and animal. Essentially, during the storm of chaos, humans and animals were merged together by the warping powers of chaos, and these monstrous creatures were capable of reproducing. And over the decades that the Storm of Chaos lasted, they became pretty much their own race, this being the Beastmen. And the Beastmen are therefore creatures of chaos. They live for chaos, they breathe for chaos, they are utterly fanatically loyal to chaos, but they are not demons. So they do not require chaos energy to stay in our world. They are material creatures, just like humans, just like elves, just like dwarves, except they have a much closer relationship with the chaos powers than any of the other factions. While a human might be corrupted to the service of chaos, a beastman is practically born into the service of chaos, and as far as I am aware, no beastman has ever turned from chaos. And from this origins, the beastmen were the natural rulers of the early world. They viewed humans as no more than prey. I mean, we were at that point essentially naked barbarians with stone clubs, if we could manage that much, or sticks in most cases, so, we weren't much of a threat. However, as the storms of chaos ebbed off and started lessening, the humans became far more ingenious than the beastmen gave us credit for. Slowly but surely the humans started to unite, for example under Sigmar Heldenhammer, creating what we today know as the Empire. And as the humans organized, the beastmen did not, because the beastmen are creatures of chaos. The very idea of organization is, well, evil to them. And again, Evil is a bad concept in my opinion because it's all about viewpoints. The Beastmen consider the humans to be vile upstarts defying the natural order of things, and the humans consider the Beastmen vile upstarts defying the natural order of things. It's all about perspective, really. But the basic thing is, everything we humans consider good, proper, religion, beauty, cleanliness, order, all of these things the Beastmen consider abhorrent. And they will go to remarkably and often suicidal lengths to try and destroy what we humans consider to be good. This is their greatest strength, as it will drive them into berserk rage, where their already considerable strength and ferocity will be much increased, but it is also their greatest weakness, often enticing them into attacking fortified strongpoints where their, complete and utter lack of organization is a bit of a problem. The Beastmen are not builders, they are not creators, they do none of these things. They don't make siege equipment except for the most basic of rams and ladders. They do not make trebuchets, they do not make cannons or catapults. They do not even have any real intelligence above that of a low animal cunning. Although some war leaders have shown at least a rudimentary grasp of tactical skill. So I'm not saying they're completely inept at taking fortifications, I'm just saying that more often than not they are considerably more likely to run screaming at the gate, bawling praise to the chaos gods and getting butchered by crossbows and arrows, rather than sneakily attack the fortress in a multiple stage assault, although it does happen. One should never underestimate the cunning of the Beastmen. They are not intelligent, I would say, as we humans consider intelligence, but they are certainly not, moronic either. The lack of creativity, of art, of mathematics, of a higher knowledge, so to say, does not necessarily mean they're not capable of just a glimmer of brilliance here and there. But back to the point I was attempting to make. As the humans became more and more organized, they started learning how to deal with the Beastmen. They started using fortifications. They started using systematic purges of the land. They cleared great swaths of the forest of Beastmen and essentially hunted them down like animals, one warband at a time. Since the Beastmen were not capable of uniting in anywhere near great enough numbers to fight the now organized nations of humanity, they were forced into hiding. They were scattered throughout the forest in small warbands, reduced to, animals. A position that they do not approve of in the slightest. They would much, much rather return to the times where humans were prey and not themselves, understandably enough. But over the thousands of years since the humans united, the Beastmen have not been able to manage this, and their hatred for humanity just keeps on growing. They hate us for everything we make. We are, as I said earlier, the perfect anti to their pro. As I said, everything we consider good and sacred they consider abhorrent, and this has bred a rather hostile relationship. The Beastmen have no diplomacy to speak of. Like I said, they will cooperate with other Chaos powers, but they will never cooperate with any other races other than Chaos. They will not cooperate with usually evil races unless tricked into it by, for example, followers of Slaanesh in the form of the Dark Elves. But they will not officially have a treaty with the Dark Elves. They will not officially work together with the Orcs, or the Tomb Kings, or the Vampire Count, unless, again, manipulated to do so. Or instructed to do so by a particularly powerful Bray Shaman that somehow says that this is the will of the gods. But they will never ever work together with humans, except for the outcasts that follow Chaos like them, in which case, they won't like it, but they are the faithful servants of the gods, and if the gods tell them to jump, they ask how high. But back to the organization of Beastmen society. Now that we've covered their general origins mythology, so to say, they were originally humans and beasts molded into one form and then became a separate species altogether, and the basics of their, social interactions, although that's not really a term you should be using for Beastmen. We'll take a look at their class system, for while Beastman is a general denominator for all Beastmen, it is not the only way. Now, a lot of the art you're going to be seeing here shows goat-headed creatures, or creatures with bull heads and these kind of things, but Beastmen can technically take any form. They could have the head of a chicken, they could have the legs of a cow, they could have the head of a rat, for example. They could be mutated in pretty much any way, as long as it is a combination of human and animal, so to say. But there are several different types of Beastmen, and the types also determine their standing within Beastmen society. So, let's start out with the simple list. We have the Gors. The Gors are the most common type, distinguished by the fact that they possess horns. But other than that, Gors, like I said, could look like pretty much anything, as long as they have some kind of horns protruding from their skull. Could be one horn, could be two horns, could be four horns, could be five, could be God knows what. And more often than not, the Gors are the ones that make up the majority of the leadership, as they are proper Beastmen. They are proper citizens, I hesitate to say, of a Beastmen society, and most of the other races look to them for leadership. And the Gors are divided into a few sub-categories, with the most common being Caprigors, which are the ones that look like goats. Their heads and their legs are shaped like goats. And this is the highest class of Gor. A Caprigor, with the aspects of a goat and curling or straight horns, is known as a true Gor, and is thereby the proper race of Beastmen. They are the purest variant of the Beastmen race. Honestly, I hesitate to call this a caste-based system, because, while I said previously the caste system of India is considered by most Westerners to be rather batshit insane, they're not this bad. I hesitate to use the comparison, but I'd probably bring up Nazi Germany with their whole idea of Übermensch and pure Aryans and all of that. A rather crazy idea, really, about the whole pure-blooded and human and that, but that is essentially what the Beastmen believe. True Gors are just worth more than everybody else because they are true Gors, and so the lesser races like the Bovigor is, subpar, and the Ungors, they're little more than dogs, really, and the Turnskins, humans who have developed mutations later in life and have joined in with the Beastmen, their worth is next to nothing. The Gors are likely to take better care of their minotaurs and monsters than they are their semi-human allies. So, while it's not a particularly safe comparison by any stretch of the imagination, I think it's probably the one that comes closest to describing Beastmen society. And before I get accused of being a Nazi or something, I suppose I should probably move on. I mentioned the Bovigor. The Bovigor have, well, as the name suggests, the head of bovine animals and the horns of bovine animals. Cows, oxes, that kind of stuff. The Bovigors are a fair bit rarer than the Caprigors, but as long as they possess no other mutations other than the bovine head, legs, and horns, they are also considered true Gors, although usually of slightly less worth than the Caprigors, simply because the Bovigors are a bit more, to use a bad pun, bull-headed. They're considered, even by Beastmen standards, to be a little bit low on the cunning. But far below them again are the so-called ungors, which, well, they're ungors. They're not proper gors. Their very name suggests that they have a very low standing in Beastman society, and that is correct. The ungors are tolerated, but they are considered very much so third-class citizens, or even slaves, really. The Beastmen have no real system of ownership or trade, so there's not really a system of organized slavery either. The very thought of anything being organized is anathema to the Beastmen, but they are definitively considered very, 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 very much so to be a subservient species to the true Gors. And the Ungors are far more varied in appearance than the Gors. They possess some form of horns, usually, but they can practically look like anything. Like I said, they could have chicken heads, wolves' heads, cow heads, for example, but if they have any kind of other mutation, for example, you could have an Ungor with curling horns, a goat head, and a goat's legs, but still be considered an Ungor if he has any further mutations. Say, for example, that he has a third arm. And while for most Chaos champions this would be considered a blessing, this would be considered an additional mutation, the Beastmen pretty much consider themselves already to be pure creatures of Chaos, and so any further mutation is seen by them almost as a kind of a punishment. A true Gore is already perfect. You cannot improve upon the perfect form, and as such, anything that goes against the true form is considered to be, well, not true. Simple as that. And just like the Gors, the Ungors are divided into a couple of different subcategories. You have the Brays, named so because most of the time they're hanging around on the outskirts of Beastmen encampments, well, braying. Not a particularly inventive name, I grant you, but it certainly describes them. But the Brays are also considered to be even less of a Gore, even than the Ungors, because the Brays do not possess horns, which makes them look suspiciously human to the rest of the Gors. So, if the Ungors are considered second or even third-class citizens, the Brays are fourth-class citizens, and below even them again are the so-called Turnskins. The Turnskins are humans who, at some later stage of their life, began to develop mutations, which, of course, in the Society of the Empire, which is strictly anti-chaos, and therefore any kind of mutation is, frowned upon, to say the absolute bloody least. It's usually impossible for these individuals to actually continue living within Empire society, and is so traced off into the forest, or, well, most of the cases, just flat out killed. The Beastmen will accept Turnskins into their, I hesitate to call them army, but warband, although, well, a 50-50 chance that they'll just, eat them. Well, actually 75%, actually, that's also 99% chance they'll simply just nom them, but they do occasionally join the Beastmen warbands, either because all of the Beastmen are, well, not hungry, or because some Bray Shaman goes like, no, look, he's blessed by chaos, clearly he's one of us, and he manages to stop the other Beastmen from, well, making him dinner, essentially. Although, even if they do manage to join a Beastmen warband, their status is slave, essentially. Even the Brays, like I said, are above them. They are the lowest of the low. So, yeah, they, even if they do survive getting, joined up in a Beastmen warband, there's nothing stopping any of the true Gors from getting a bit hungry and having a late-night snack at the Turnskins' expense. However, though, and here's a little bit of an interesting one, all humans that join a warband do not necessarily need to be Turnskins. There is a further subclass of Ungors, so-called Gaves, which is Nordic. Well, it's not really, but it's close enough. Anyways, Gave, or as we say it, Gave, spelled in essentially the exact same way, except for the S on the end for the plural, because there's no plural of the Norwegian word gave. The plural would be gaver. Now, I'm probably just annoying you now by speaking Norwegian, but yeah. Essentially, they are gifts. Why are they gifts? Well, here's the thing. The gaves, or no, I shouldn't speak the Norwegian word because it'd just be horrible. The gaves, let's start over again, are human children born with some form of mutations. Maybe they are born with horns, maybe they have distinctly bovine-looking features, maybe they're born with goat legs, maybe they're born with fur, a million variations on good old-fashioned mutations. In some cases, the parents will try to hide their child's mutations, although this usually ends really poorly, both for the child and the parents, because, again, the Empire and, well, pretty much all human nations are not particularly optimistic about the whole, mutation thing. But more often than not, the child is considered a curse, a punishment from the gods, and is set out into the forest to, well, die of starvation and exposure. Warhammer universe is not a particularly friendly place at the best of times, but the Beastmen often adopt these gaves, considering them gifts from the gods. And while a gave can never be considered a true gore, he is usually treated, or it, should I say it? Ugh, I feel like that's condescending. Oh well, it. If it is accepted into a Beastman warband, it is considered to be, at the very least, of more worth than your average turnskins. Again, they're not considered gores, but they're not quite considered ungores either, or at the very least they're considered to be one of the better type of ungores. And so are treated with, well, if not respect or any kind of kindness, they are at least accepted and not used purely for slave labor, unlike their turnskin counterparts. Then we have two other classes, the first being the Bray Shamans, which are beastmen, pretty much always true gores who have been chosen by the gods with visions of the future or instructions. The Bray Shamans are usually considered to be more or less, intermediaries between the gods, so most Beastmen war leaders won't just outright kill them, although it happens, to say the absolute least. And as such, the Bray Shamans are the diplomats of the Beastmen race, although, again, diplomat is not really the correct term. I think probably intermediary is a better one, because they will negotiate with various Beastmen warband over finding a common goal or a common enemy, but they're not really going to be, well, uniting large swaths of Beastmen unless there is a particularly important objective. Like if the gods have told them, like, you must go and fetch like 5,000 Beastmen and attack this keep or something, which is going to be quite the task, as, well, meeting that many Beastmen war leaders, the odds are pretty good that one of them is going to take a disliking to the Bray Shaman and have himself a little bit of goat for breakfast. However, should a Bray Shaman actually, not get eaten, he usually enters into a bit of a favoured position within the warband, being considered an authority on the will of the gods, and therefore the war leader's primary counsel, if the war leader should ever actually ask for counsel, at the very least. The last subspecies is the Beast Woman, which we don't know all that much about. We know there are female beastmen, but, we don't really have all of that much information as to, how or why. Well, we know the why, because, you need more beastmen. They are a race that procreates relatively normally through the good old-fashioned rubby-dubby and woohoo, but other than that, we don't have much information as to the standing within society. Though, considering it is a society mainly based on brute strength, I probably doubt they're all that high up on the list of power brokers, let's just say. In addition to the gores, though, the Beastmen war herds often include examples of other species. They often use minotaurs, centaurs, and dragon ogres. These are also creatures of chaos, and they are far more comfortable cooperating with Beastmen rather than champions of chaos of a more human origin, simply because they consider themselves to be all true followers of chaos, while the human upstarts are merely part-time followers of chaos. They might be champions of chaos, but they're not quite creatures of chaos. So, with that out of the way, what else should we discuss? Well, I should probably mention the simple fact that the Beastmen do not build settlements. They don't build cities, they don't really raise any monuments. The only things they build, quote-unquote, are so-called herdstones. The herdstones are basically simple shrines to the Chaos Gods, usually just a really, really large rock with a bunch of Chaos symbols carved into it. And as for encampments, well, they don't build encampments as we would, well, consider encampments. If anything, there's a giant roaring fire pit and maybe a herdstone, and that's pretty much it. They don't drag around with tents, they don't build temporary settlements, they don't use walls, or any of these things that we consider to be, encampment-y, because all of these things, well, they seem just a little bit too organized for the Beastmen's tastes, really. Furthermore, I should also mention that the Beastmen are essentially always at war. Always. They are at war with, well, everything. They are fighting the Skaven, they are fighting bands of orcs and goblins in the forests, they are fighting the Empire, they are fighting the Wood Elves, they are fighting dwarves, they are fighting anything and everything that is not a worshipper of chaos. Aggressive species, to say the absolute bloody least. And they're not fighting them because of, well, ambitions, yeah? They don't want to conquer land, they don't really care. They fight because that is what Chaos wishes them to. Chaos wants to, well, destroy the world. Or take over the world, anyways. And that is what the Beastmen fight for. They fight for the greater glory of Chaos. They fight because fighting grants power to Chaos. They spread disease because it grants power to Chaos, and so on. They are, in every single shape and form, creatures of the purest chaos, creatures of the most unwavering of loyalty when it comes to their ungodly masters. And this is also the primary reason why the Empire is such a dangerous bloody place, because the forest of the Empire, well, the Empire is mostly covered in forests, is just filled with Beastmen. There are no unfortified Empire villages. They just don't exist, because, well, the Beastmen won't let them exist. At the very least, they have palisades. In most cases, they have relatively sturdy wooden walls, and if they actually want to stay alive for a considerable amount of time, they'll probably invest in some proper stone walls pretty damn quickly, as the Beastmen take a rather considerable amount of insult to seeing anything built, well, anywhere. And like I said previously, the Beastmen don't need a reason to attack a settlement. They don't need a motivation. They just go like, "Oi, I built something there, let's tear it down." They can't even really control themselves half the time. And this unwavering aggression, this complete hatred of everything that is not chaos, probably makes the Beastmen the greatest threat to the Warhammer world. Now, being a Skaven fanboy, I'd probably say it was the Skaven. Orc fanboy, I'd probably say it was the Orcs, but in all due honesty, the Beastmen are probably it, simply because they hate everything and everyone, and they need no motivation. Orcs are motivated because they want to grow bigger. They like a good fight because it makes them grow bigger. The Skaven are motivated because they want more stuff. They want more land, they want more warpstone, etc. All of the races have motivations. The Beastmen don't. All they want to do is kill everything, because they are creatures of pure, raw chaos. And everything that is not chaos is evil to them. And anything that is not chaos is something they wish to destroy. I think I'll finish up on one last note. All of this might make you think that the Beastmen are just mere savages, and yes, you could certainly make that argument, but they do have a certain level of sophistication. They have a certain understanding of magic via their brave shamans. They don't really make weapons, actually, they don't make weapons at all. The most they could ever get themselves to actually make would be a spear with a relatively well-sharpened rock at the end, and pretty much all of their weapons are scavenged, or hell, they'll even just take pieces of metal and hammer them roughly into the shape of something that might be considered an axe or sword, and just simply use that as a weapon. But what makes them just a teensy-weensy bit sophisticated is the fact that they have their own language, although this is not a language they invented, which is pretty damn important to, mention. It is the so-called Dark Tongue, a chaos language, really. The Beastmen know it, not so much because they have been taught it, but because they just instinctively understand it. They are born with an understanding of the Dark Tongue, like they are born with an understanding of chaos. So it's not much of an intellectual achievement, but should probably mention it, And that's pretty much it for the Beastmen video. Honestly, I'm not too confident about this one, guys. I'm sorry about that, but the Beastmen are a strange race to do a lore video on, simply because their lore is, well, they're Beastmen, they're mutated from humans and animals, and they hate everything. I'm sorry, even I can't actually milk all that much out of that. A proper Beastmen player could undoubtedly tell you more, as they do have a fair bit of lore, but I've never been much of a Beastmen player myself, honestly, so this is about the best I can manage. Anyways, I hope it has been somewhat enlightening at the very least. I have been Arch, thank you very much for listening, and hope to see you soon. Have a good day.